let's talk Clair Obscur Expedition 33.
See you in the next life.
Hello and welcome in. I'm so happy that you all are here. I was able to get my little fingers on an early access preview of Clair Obscur Expedition 33. Massive shout out and thank you to the Sandfall team for allowing me to get access to this game early, because I've been very excited for the game ever since it was announced at the summertime last year. If you've been here before, welcome back. I'm so happy you're here. If this is your first time here and you're wondering who the hell is she and why should I trust what she's got to say or not, entirely fair. Let me tell you a little bit about myself. I am a variety gaming streamer, but I typically play ARPGs. So think your Elden Ring, Bloodborne, Dark Souls. I play Stellar Blade. I play action adventure like God of War. I've played Lies of P. I've played Final Fantasy 16, Final Fantasy 7 Remake, Final Fantasy 7 Rebirth. And the only turn-based game that I've played is Baldur's Gate 3. So when I'm reviewing this, I've had some experience with JRPGs. I've had a little bit of experience with turn-based games, but it's not my core bread and butter. ARPGs, action adventure games, and certainly breaking down narrative games is my bread and butter. So hopefully, if that sounds like you, stick around. And the last thing I will be saying is this will be completely spoiler free. I will of course be talking about the setup for the world, the story as what's been described to us already, so I won't be spoiling anything new. I'll be showing you the combat, but what I won't be showing you are cutscenes. So if you are someone, you're concerned, you want to make sure that you're not seeing cutscenes that you shouldn't be or what have you, this little review is safe for you. So let's get into it. The game is set in the city or town called Lumiere. It is essentially the game's version of Paris. There is a version of the Eiffel Tower there. The game is set during the Belle Epoque era. If you're wondering, that sounds vaguely familiar, it could be either one, because you played Lies of P, which is also set during the Belle Epoque era, or two, you're just a little smarty pants who remembers that from school, so well done you. Not all is sunny and bright in the lovely town of Lumiere, despite what the name suggests. They are plagued in a way with someone called the Paintress. The Paintress paints a number, counting down from 100 every year, and each year marks a year of death. So essentially, when the Paintress reaches 0, total world death. Definitely we want to avoid. Each year, Lumiere sends out a group of people on an expedition. We are playing as people who are on Expedition 33. That is why the game is called Expedition 33. Smarty pantses and everyone, come to the front of the classroom, because we're going to run through some information about the Belle Epoque era. Belle Epoque is literally, the translation in French would be like the beautiful era. It is essentially France's golden age. If you want to think in similar terms, we hear the phrase Renaissance as well. Renaissance would be Italy's version of the golden age, literally translates to Italy's rebirth. That's what Renaissance means. Most of the art and most of what you associate with being French would have happened during this Belle Epoque era. So most of the French painters that you're familiar with would be from this era. Impressionist art really came into prominence during this era. The Eiffel Tower was built during this era. So a lot of what you know to be French would have happened during this small time, which would have been 1870 to around like 1915, 1914, I believe. I've talked about art that you would recognize coming from France during this period. And speaking of art, and we've already talked about the Paintress, art and painting majorly influences the story in the game, setting for the game, the characters in the game. So let's break it down a bit. First, let's start off with the name. We call it shorthand Expedition 33. We know why Expedition 33 is called Expedition 33 and where it comes from, but you might be wondering, Clair Obscur, what does that mean? Pardon my French accent or lack thereof. Clair Obscur is the French translation of the Italian word chiaroscuro. We, in English, use the Italian term chiaroscuro. It basically translates to light and shadow. It's not a perfect one-to-one translation, but essentially light and shadow. And what it means, or what it uses to describe, is the interplay of lightness and darkness in paintings. I would probably say the most famous artist, or the artist we most closely associate with the chiaroscuro art style, would be Caravaggio, who is an Italian painter who would have painted during the Renaissance period. Again, it's that really strong juxtaposition and butting together of lightness and darkness, which will inevitably play a role, I believe, in the game. I don't think it's any coincidence that the city is called Lumiere. Lumiere literally means to be light, to be bright. think about Lumiere from Beauty and the Beast. Lumiere is the name of the candlestick, right? One who is associated with producing light. And so I think it will be about the people of lightness coming up to and butting up against the people of darkness, perhaps the paintress. And I think the really beautiful thing about art, when we think about Clair Obscur, Chiaroscuro, is that lightness and darkness come together not to compete with one another, but how they complement one another and produce something that's even more beautiful and more complete, because it's that contrast between the two that allows for dimension, at least in art. So potentially we might be seeing those themes in the game. I don't know, but it's something to chew on. We've talked about the interplay between light and shadow, with the city being called Lumiere, but what about the shadow? Where does the shadow part come from? The darkness, I believe, comes from the character Verso. We're not quite sure who this character is. We do know for sure that he is voiced by the impeccably amazing Ben Starr, who delivered a fantastic role as Clive Rosfield in Final Fantasy XVI. Please, if you've not played that game, play that game, check it out. Even if it's just to listen to his voice acting and the voice acting of all the other people in the game. It's fantastically done. But Verso is another art term, and Verso literally translates to or means the reverse side of a painting. So if we're thinking about the reverse side of a painting, it is dark, right? Because paintings are typically meant to be hung. They don't exist in a free floating space. So it's the dark space, but also it's a space that's void of art. You don't paint something on the back of a painting. If anything, you'd potentially have the artist's name on a back, but artists would also typically paint on the front. So I think there's themes there of darkness, of blankness, and something that could be, again, butting up against the lightness of the town. I don't know much about Verso. We've only seen his look and feel and little snippets of his voice acting, Ben's voice acting, but I'm very excited to learn more about the character when the game comes out. Speaking of other potentially nefarious characters, we have the impeccably amazing Andy Serkis, who surely, if you've not seen Lord of the Rings and you don't recognize him as Gollum, you need to almost frankly pause watching this video and go watch all of the Lord of the Rings and then obviously come back. The man is a tour de force. When it comes to voice acting, he almost bloody invented the damn thing. He plays the character Renoir. This is very clearly a reference to the artist Renoir. Renoir is arguably one of the most famous, if not the most famous, French painters. And if you could believe it, Renoir was a prominent painter during the Belle Epoque era. He is a very famous Impressionist painter. Undoubtedly a reference to the Renoir. I'm sure the Sandfall team are acutely aware that people would associate the two. And if you didn't know of Renoir, now you know. You've seen some of his artwork that I'm sure very conveniently showing now. Incredibly talented. And the whole idea with Impressionist painting is that you're not super faithfully one-to-one creating what something looks like, right? It's not meant to be a photo of what that is. It is meant to be an impression of what it is, a hint of what it is. So it's an art style that's very much dominated by a bit of like fluidity, an art style that doesn't have harsh boundaries, art style that portrays real life, but in well, certainly not a 100% faithful way, in an almost softish kind of way. This could also be a suggestion of themes in the game about Renoir's role of maybe creating a world that is not quite our own world. I don't know. I'm reaching out here for ideas. Would definitely want to hear your ideas, but for sure, we know that they want us to associate Andy Serkis' Renoir with the painter Renoir. And then we've got the paintress, whomever that might be. So we've talked about our villains. Let's talk about our protagonists, the good guys. Our lead character is Gustave, voiced by the impeccably amazing Charlie Cox, who most people probably know from Daredevil, but he also did very well in Boardwalk Empire. Worth watching. I loved seeing him in that. Gustave is most certainly, in my mind, it has to be, is most certainly a reference to Gustave Eiffel, who you might have picked up on, shares a name with the Eiffel Tower. If you can believe it, it's because Gustave Eiffel built the Eiffel Tower. Not only did he build the Eiffel Tower, he's also responsible for creating the Statue of Liberty, which exists in New York City, which is where I'm actually from. Well, not I'm from there. I'm from London. but I live in New York City. I mentioned this earlier on in the video, so if you recalled this, well done. You're very smart, you're paying attention. But the Eiffel Tower was built during the Belle Epoque era, so Gustave Eiffel was definitely alive during the Belle Epoque era. I am 100% confident that Gustave is a reference to Gustave Eiffel. To even back this up further, our Gustave in the game is the engineer of the group. He uses, it's a sword, a pistol, and then he's got a sort of pseudo-mechanical arm. So he's very much an engineer, as the real Gustave would have been an engineer. So I think we can tick the box on that. Next, we have Lune, which is essentially our mage of the group. Lune is voiced by Kirsty Ryder, who some of you may know from the video game Sifu. I tried to look around. There were no prominent French figures called Lune. In the game, it's pronounced Lune. If you're saying it in French, it would just be Lune. Lune literally translates to moon in French. The only connection I could make would be the piece of music Clair de Lune, which I would love to play for you if I could, but YouTube does not like when you do that. Or maybe I can play it. Just look it up after this. You for sure know the piece of music. Anyone who watches Twilight, if you watch Twilight, it's the piece of music that Edward really likes, so you've definitely heard it before.
Debussy. I don't know.
Yeah. Clair de Lune is great.
It's beautiful. Anyway, the composer is Claude Debussy. Debussy was a very famous composer who was alive during the Belle Epoque era and would have been working during the Belle Epoque era. It's not crazy if it's a reference to Clair de Lune, the piece of music, but I don't have 100% confidence on it. So if you've got any ideas, please share them down below in the comments. We have another character, Ciel. Ciel, we did not get to play with in the preview, so I'm not too familiar with Ciel's role in the group. Ciel is another one that I'm not too sure about. I think the one thing that I am fairly confident with is that the S in front of Ciel is there just so that people who don't know how to speak French do understand how to pronounce it. Ciel in French is normally spelt without the S, it's just C-I-E-L, and it literally translates to sky. It could be, if we're talking about artistic terms, it could be a reference to like the beauty in nature. If we go, okay, Gustave is an engineer, Lune represents the artistliness of music, potentially Ciel is meant to represent the artistliness in nature itself. I don't know, again, put your ideas in the comments. I might have missed something. Then lastly is Maëlle. Maëlle is voiced by the incredible Jennifer English, most notably of fame as Shadowheart in Baldur's Gate 3. But if you played Elden Ring, Jennifer is also in Elden Ring. She's also voicing the protagonist in Tides of Annihilation. Jennifer is booked and busy, and I could not be happier because she is just absolutely incredible. And with such a distinct voice too, it's so amazingly done. Maëlle in French, I think literally translates to princess. Again, I don't know any famous French people with the name princess. And the French monarchy would have been abolished like 100 years before the Belle Epoque era. So I'm not too sure if she's, I would assume she's a reference to something because it seems that all the naming here is very intentional. I don't think they just picked it because it's a beautiful name. It is a beautiful name. I think it's very commonly used as a French girl's name, which is kind of ironic that I can't find any famous Maëlles. She is our master swordsman of the group. When you play as her, you basically get to adopt different stances. If you've seen like fencing in the Olympics, for example, she's doing the like parry riposte and using the different stances, and it's really good fun. It's incredibly well done. As I mentioned, Gustave, Lune, and Maëlle are the three protagonists that you get to play with in the early preview, so those are the three that I know the most of, but I'm excited to learn about the others, and there are also some other little bits and bobs protagonists or characters in the game that exist that I've not talked about, but it's mainly because they weren't part of that early preview. I barely got to experience any of the story in the demo, in the early demo, aka we are obviously just at the tip of the iceberg. But what I did see in the initial concept, well, okay, so the initial concept from the summertime, amazing, incredible. Also, like the gameplay loop and the combat really suited me well. I was for sure intrigued. I can confirm that the execution and the world building and the storytelling totally delivers on the excitement that I had before. As I'd mentioned, I won't show you any of the cutscenes, but these that you see here are my genuine reactions that I had to some of the cutscenes. The storytelling went in ways that I wasn't expecting and was a lot, in a way, darker than I was expecting as well. Darker, playing on the concept of light and dark again. Genius. The artistic influence don't just end with our protagonists and the story, they for sure carry on into the look and feel and the world building of the game. The game, 100%, it's stunning, one, and two, it definitely has an artistly feel to it. Something that I personally enjoy is that the people and the world aren't created 100% realistically. Dare I say, it is almost impressionistic. I think sometimes that super hyper realistic look and feel of a game totally suits certain games. I'm so happy that they didn't go that way with this game. It's not meant to say that the whole thing is very like graphic and cartoony. It's obviously not. But as you can see here with the clips that I'm showing you, it's not, you know, one of those games where you see every pore on the character or where things have every single etching of detail drawn into it. It does feel kind of artistically and impressionally. And again, like the worlds themselves don't feel like 100% something that you would live in. So when you get these early demos, you also get a little briefing pack that tells you, you know, things about the story you need to know ahead of time and some setting stuff and whatnot. And one of the things it also tells you is like roughly how long they expect for you to take when you're playing this. They said it would take like 3 to 4 hours to play through. I had to have been playing for almost double that time, purely because I was just walking through areas super slowly, soaking it all in, collecting all the loot, of course, and trying to explore and do all the fights. It was just so beautiful to explore and be in around. I kind of didn't want to leave. The preview only has us exploring about like 2 to 3 like hubs or worlds, I want to say, or like general areas, but each one felt very, very unique. The second of the 2 locations that I'm showing here, it's set in an underwater area, but don't worry, there's no swimming, thank God. I don't care how great swimming mechanics are in games, there's always going to be something that's innately frustrating to me to swim, and it was just absolutely stunning. I wasn't expecting something like that from this game. It was just beautiful. It took me by surprise in the best way possible. I love how they executed that. Funnily enough, probably the part of the game that is most faithfully or like most realistically rendered is when we're in this manor. They have these paintings hanging, and the paintings are of Lumiere, interestingly enough, and they feel so real, like you almost want to touch it and you can like feel the texture of the canvas and the paint. Very, very oddly fitting. The last bit that I wanted to mention about location is this overworld area that we have. Our characters have one main world hub that exists as a place for them to go to camp. This allows for conversations with each companion, similar to like what you do in Baldur's Gate 3. Gustav will write in his journal so he can advise future expeditions. You'll actually be collecting journals from previous expeditions during your playthrough, which is incredibly cool, incredibly smart, because you know that all these previous expeditions have been failures. We're the 33rd expedition out of, I would assume, close to 100. And all of these journals that you pick up, they are all voice acted, which I think was just a beautiful touch. The overworld hub has you pulled back very far from the characters. I think it's a really interesting POV. I'm not sure how much I love it from a practicality standpoint, but stylistically, I think it's a really awesome choice. It's not something that I'm used to seeing too much. I think it's very, very cool and very well done. Okay, so we know our story, we know our characters, we know our setting. So let's get into the meat and potatoes of it all and talk about the combat. Again, I want to caveat here, I said it earlier in the video, but I want to reiterate, the only true turn-based game that I've played is Baldur's Gate 3. And I guess Pokemon, if you want to count Pokemon, but I don't know if Pokemon really counts, but it is technically a turn-based game. Make of it what you will. But whilst I've played very few turn-based games, I have played a lot of ARPGs. Sidebar, if you have any favorite turn-based games that you would recommend, please definitely also put them in the comments, because after playing Baldur's Gate and after playing this, I definitely want to get into more of them. The combat is turn-based meets ARPG like Sekiro, Lies of P, or Stellar Blade. The core of the combat circles around generating AP points. AP points allow you to use your character's skills, which is where you'll be doing the brunt of your damage. You gain AP points from doing basic attacks or from executing perfect dodges and perfect parries. you're greater rewarded for perfect parrying, as you have a chance to execute a combo finisher that looks and feels effing awesome. It is also critical that you learn how to perfect dodge and perfect parry, especially in higher difficulties. There are also quick time events in your attacks. Hit them in the correct range and you'll increase that skill's power. There's an option in the accessibilities menu to have it set so you always perfectly execute the QTEs, just if that's of interest to you, that option is available. The further on you go in the game and the more skills you get, the more your team synergy is important, and understanding how to combo with your teammates. So like very similarly like would happen in Final Fantasy VII Remake or Rebirth. The more you open up, the more that kind of stuff is important. But in the beginning, it's not too much. It kind of eases you into it, which is great. You'll have a chance to find and upgrade multiple different weapons, as well as traditional skill tree. Speaking of similarities with Final Fantasy VII, you collect pictos, which you slot into your weapon or you equip it to a weapon to give you special perks, exactly like how you would do with materia in the Final Fantasy VII game. The general gameplay loop of the game is, of course, we've talked about what that combat looks like in game, but you'll also be kind of walking around, you'll run into smaller mobs out in the wild. If you interact with them, there's a chance for you to also interact with them first, which will mean that you will jump up higher in the queue to fight them. You'll kick off that fight, you'll fight typically like 3 enemies at a time. The enemies will vary. They each have their own weaknesses and strengths, etc. And you'll also just be fighting those bigger bosses that would traditionally have that like health bar, especially if you're talking about like ARPG or what have you. It would be like doing your boss fight. The fights just feel awesome and everything feels appropriately challenging. I played it on base difficulty. There's a story difficulty and there's also a higher difficulty above normal. I forget what it's called, but the fights feel so good. And even at normal difficulty, you can run into bosses that will absolutely 100% one-shot you. So again, you can either do that fight perfectly dodging and perfectly parrying, which means you don't take any damage, or you have the opportunity to go off to explore, to upgrade your level, to find better equipment, to find better pictos, which might give you better vulnerability or survivability against these bosses, and just come back and fight them. This boss here in particular, I had to go leave. I couldn't fight it at the time. And I actually don't think I ever went back to fight it. Now that I think about it, I've got to do that. I've talked about all the things that I love, which are plenty and many. So I'm going to point out one con. And it's because I frankly genuinely only have one con, and it's also so nitpicky. It's so not important. I'm caveating here. This is not a do or die con, but it is one thing that I kept on noticing and was a bit distracting to me. And this is something that distracts me in a lot of RPG games. So it's not a problem that's unique to this game. I did notice that the lip syncing is a bit off from the voice acting. I am right now about to preview a small snippet of a cutscene just so you can tell or you can see what I'm talking about. Otherwise, I don't think it's fair to say it and be like, well, what does she mean by that? I've picked out a little section that I don't think is much of a spoiler, but you've been warned. I would probably skip ahead like 10, 15 seconds if you want to avoid that.
You swore the oath. When one falls, we continue.
Yes, I know.
When one falls. When one falls. Not if, when. We knew not all of us would make it, but we continue. As long as even one of us stands, our fight is not over.
I think what the problem is here, and honestly, I had this same problem in Final Fantasy 16, and they both share this one thing, which is, I think the problem is that the voice acting is so good and so well done that it makes it more noticeable when the lip syncing doesn't quite match up. And I also do understand, because when I had this conversation whilst I was playing Final Fantasy 16, a lot of people have said, well, you know, there's a lot of dialogue in the game. And of course, the game doesn't only come out in English. Final Fantasy 16 didn't only come out in English, of course, even though the primary voice acting was in English. Just as that's the case, the same is also true for Clair Obscur Expedition 33. You're going to get English voice acted version, French voice acted version with French voice actors, and then there'll be subtitle options in a handful of other languages as well. So I do get that it is a lot of dialogue, and that, you know, potentially the primary language that they're creating for isn't English, and they may have like different, I don't know. It's just a bit noticeable. It's not like there's a desync. It's not like it's off from one another. It just like isn't 100% faithfully to what they're saying. Again, you know, truly this is like a suffering from success moment. It's like the smallest nitpick. But frankly, it's the only negative thing I could think to say about the game. Make of that what you will. I do not think it's a do or die, like a break moment for whether or not you should buy the game. As you can tell, I am genuinely so incredibly excited for this game. It came out of nowhere for me and everyone when it was announced last summer during Summerfest, I think it was. Don't quote me on that. And I'm just thrilled that it's matches that excitement. The voice acting cast, which I think is one of the things that most people notice, is so strong. And I truly feel like they're going to have a story that lives up to the quality that we've got in the game, which makes me very happy. But also in a way, more than that, the thing that I love to see are new players in the gaming space. I love seeing new developers coming out. I love seeing fresh ideas, fresh stories being told. I love seeing games that don't feel beholden to or tethered or bound by pre-existing franchises or IPs. I want more freshness in the gaming space, and this certainly feels like that. I think the story is something that's super unique and compelling. For me, I've never seen this blend of turn-based meets ARPG. That's perhaps something that's exists in a previous game that I've not played. I'm not going to sit here and say they're for sure 100% confidently the ones that came up with it, but I've never experienced anything like this. I think it's amazing. And most importantly, I like seeing new developers and new studios in the space. In my opinion, gaming thrives when we have this kind of diversity. So I am most happy and excited about that. I will 100% be playing this game when it comes out. I hope that you will be joining me on that playthrough. This is a little summation video, or rather probably a long summation video I've waffled on for quite a while. If you would like to see my entire playthrough of the game unedited, that will be uploaded onto the live tab of my YouTube channel. I will warn you though, it's me replaying the game on stream, so I'll be wearing a different outfit than what you see from my gameplay. My first time playing it. It also means that the live stream that you see of me watching it, if you do want to go watch the live stream, I'll probably have it linked below this video as well. It also means that you're not going to be seeing like my first reaction to cutscenes, and I will also be familiar with the gameplay loop already, so just you've been warned. But if you want to see the whole gameplay of the demo that's available, that will be made available to everyone. If you've made it to this far in the video, I am so deeply appreciative. Thank you so much. I'm new to making these more scripted videos and editing it down. I hope you enjoyed it. I really need to make more of them. If you did enjoy it, it would mean the world to me if you could write that down in the comments. Give the video a like. Subscribing to the channel makes a huge difference. Following me on my other social medias, all of which are linked below in the description, also makes a big difference. I stream 5 days a week live on Twitch and YouTube, so please, I hope that you will follow me there and I get to see you in the future. Thank you.